Monster Hunter Wilds Switch X is one of the best iterations of the weapon we've ever seen, and I'll explain why in this video, but before that I have to drop another hot take. Sunbreak Switch X isn't peak Switch X, it is peak Sword Mode.
So you have chosen death.
What is the game plan of Switch X in Sunbreak? You get the monster's attention, ideally by a sorted draw attack, and counter the roar. That is literally by far the very best option to start any hunt. Why? Because you deal absolute massive damage and it instantly puts you in amped state. Not even 5 seconds into the hunt. You are amped up and have dealt a huge chunk of damage. Now what? Either more counters, because the monster may immediately be enraged, so you drop another counter, or you go about your business in sword mode, and yeah, sure, you occasionally switch back to X mode to reposition or to regain mobility, but you cannot tell me that you are ever attacking the monster with even 3 X attacks in a row. But what happens when the switch gauge gets too low? This happens. Nice switch gauge management, bro. Oh no, I am in X mode and I am below the morphing threshold and I don't have the wire bug reload with me. Who cares, man? 2-stage morph slash is here to save you from using that disgusting X mode for even a single second. Now, don't be fooled by my rant. I love playing Switch X in Sunbreak. It is literally everything I use, but it isn't peak Switch X. It is peak sword mode. X mode gets the fire bursts from end state, okay. And who cares? With or without end state, sword mode deals higher DPS, end state in Sunbreak simply boosts the overall DPS by adding fire bursts to all attacks, which is very cool, but it doesn't change anything from X mode being much weaker to sword mode. Now I do really love that the optimal DPS chain is a morph loop. That is super nice, and personally I think that is the way it should be, right? After all, in my opinion, Switch X should be about perfectly intertwining both modes fluently in battle and never having to back down to create a flow of constant pressure and DPS on the monster. And yes, that's the case in Sunbreak, but it is 90% sword mode and that is my personal issue with it. I always wanted for both modes to be, maybe not equal, but to have their unique and essential role. I bought the whole Switch X, so I wanna use the whole Switch X. And that is finally the case in Wilds. No passive switch gauge regeneration unless the weapon is sheathed. I see why that's a problem for many people and I had to get used to it too, but that's it. I got used to the change and now I barely notice it anymore. It just promotes and rewards aggression even more. Now I will fully admit the gain per hit in X mode should be a bit higher overall, especially on everything that isn't Spiral Burst Slash, but that is why controlled morphing to X mode for a quick Spiral Burst Slash is incentivized to quickly refill the gauge. And you also have the Heavy Slam, the Offset, follow-up Heavy Slam and so on to get a nice boost to switch gauge. You also get a nice chunk of switch gauge back after entering amped state. Look at this. I enter amped state, switch to X mode for a Spiral Burst Slash, boom. Now we can have fun in sword mode. The gauge consumption on standard sword attacks could also be lower, yes. I don't want to pretend like the weapon is completely fine and everybody who says otherwise is wrong. The weapon has its issues and a lot has changed from the previous generation, especially from Sunbreak. I know the damage of Switch X in Wilds is horrible, 100% true, and the devs have reacted somewhat to it. I hope it really isn't that clear from the community update, but I just hope they buff all motion values across the board. But can we just look past that fact for a moment and just imagine our damage was on par with other weapons or how it used to be in 5th gen? Then we are looking at such an amazing iteration of this weapon. I'd love to see the highest DPS chain being something like the Morph Sweep loop. Morph Sweep has good damage, again, minding the circumstances of overall way too little damage. And now we have a 10% increase in damage thanks to Power X mode, and we are getting Rapid Morph back for even more damage and a faster loop of this chain. That would reward the management of Power X mode and Amped State. Okay, only for one strike in this particular chain, but anyway. The Counter and Offset Rising Slash are locked to either mode and can't be accessed from both modes directly. I also like that, because it forces you to think about what you want to do and gives both modes more personality. X mode being the brutish, hard-hitting side of the weapon, amplified by the Offset Slash, and Sword mode being the swift flurry of attacks that never stops, enhanced by a counter that is perfect for that role. Yes, The counter is also a huge win in my book. The chip damage is ass, it just shouldn't be a thing, but by a perfect parry it gets like, what, 90% damage reduction now, and I would prefer if a perfect parry would erase all chip damage and a standard parry would still give some minor chip damage. Personally, I think that would be fair, but the counter itself is such a nice tool to stay in the fight, build amp meter and a bit of switch gauge, and it chains directly into Heaven Ward Flurry, leading to a huge boost in amp meter. It doesn't deal huge damage. I mean, yeah, we know nothing did in the beta, but isolating the damage values for just Switch X, the parry simply is a tool to stay in the fight and reward you with a switch gauge and amp meter and not to be your main source of damage. Perfectly fine. What is not perfectly fine is emptying the switch gauge completely, resulting in the punishing morph animation, locking you into place, further reducing your time in sword mode. That is a change I really don't welcome at all. It was a skill thing until now to use all of your switch gauge and then safely switch back to X mode if you could in every single generation as far as I'm aware. Now reaching the morphing threshold is like a warning that you should switch back soon, and emptying the gauge completely now results in a punishment. I don't like that. Maybe it is a bug, like not being able to counter roars. Yes, that's a bug and it is possible on newer builds of the game. But on the other side, I somewhat understand it because the game tells you, okay, no, your gauge is empty, you're going to be locked in the morph animation now. But again, I really don't like this at all, because in every single generation it was possible. I've read so many comments about there not being a flow anymore. Yes, there is. The flow is actually amazing. The mechanics changed though. We are all facing completely new monsters and people force themselves to use the full release slash, which is supposed to be a finisher because their hunts take too long otherwise, in a demo that was available for 72 hours and was to stress test the game and give people a chance to give feedback and experience their favorite weapons in the next generation. After I realized I wasn't horrible at this game and my weapons simply dealt way too little damage overall, you know what I did? I wrote in the feedback, I deal too little damage, please fix, and continue to use the entire moveset and engage with the new mechanics. I'm not a speedrunner, why would I subject myself to dedicating all resources towards the full release slash and have a miserable experience doing so because FRS is supposed to be a finisher and is not designed to be spammed, only to get a time on a hunt that is somewhat on par with other weapons. Nobody who doesn't play Switch X cares how long your hunt took. Be proud of your hunting time with Switch X, given its beta and demo state. My accomplishments in the beta were more about keeping the flow going and not having to use healing items. I know my damage output is ass, so why would I waste my time trying to get a good run as somebody who doesn't really speedrun? But please don't get me wrong, it is very important that we point out that the damage is too low and the reliance on FRS is a horrible gameplay loop, and that we listen to experienced players and speedrunners who know what they're doing, because even though I don't speedrun, yet, I want speedrunners to also have fun while doing their runs, and I trust them when they say best way to play is spam full release and that sucks. That does suck, and forcing yourself to play like that leads to not enjoying the amazing weapon and constantly struggling to keep your switch gauge. Now let's talk about full release slash and the unbridled slash. They are amazing in what they're supposed to be, finishers. The animation looks sick and, well, let's not talk about the damage for once. Using these finishers when your gauge is low lets you empty the gauge without having to sit through the animation, and it leads directly into the spiral rising slash, rewarding you back with a lot of switch gauge for planning ahead. Landing the finisher and the spiral burst slash, which take a long time to pull off, should be rewarded. Don't come at me with some toxic positivity bullshit or whatever. I don't want to force you to think positively about Switch X with this video or say, no, the devs are perfect, they did everything right and you're just too bad to see it. Switch X has its issues. By far the biggest is the general damage. That low damage makes people focus on the full release too much, leading to further frustration. I may be wrong, so please take this statement with a grain of salt, but it feels like nobody wants to accept any of the changes to Switch X and the new mechanics and direction the weapon takes in Wilds, which breaks my cold dead heart, because for the first time since the introduction of Switch X, the balance of both modes could be better than ever. Sword mode needing X mode to succeed, X mode having relevant damage that is temporarily outclassed by amped up sword mode, finishing in either ZST or FRS to finish off the rest of the gauge, and fluently using both modes in a constant dance with the monster, while also giving both modes their distinct personalities of X mode being brutish and sword mode swift. I had an absolute blast with Switch X during my 25 hours of the beta, and I cannot wait for Wilds to release so I can build proper sets, craft all the sick new gear and Switch X's, and face new and old monsters for hundreds and thousands of hours to come. I've had so many comments talking about people dropping Switch X because the gameplay loop is so awful. I truly believe the general gameplay loop is better than ever, and the root problem is the damage output, which made people develop the gameplay loop of hyper-focusing on FRS over anything else, leading to frustration with the weapon for obvious reasons. We really talked about that enough, I think, and all the other issues are so minor in my opinion. No passive gauge regen. Get used to attack in X mode and utilize Heavy Slam and Spiral Burst Slash for quick refills. Having it back would be nice, but I can live without it, and you can too. Chip damage on the counter is too high. We voiced that concern and it was addressed, and once we have proper armors and skills, I believe the chip damage won't be so bad in the end. Emptying the gauge completely in sword mode forces the standing morph animation. Yeah. This one sucks. You can try to get used to morph back to X mode earlier and learn to use the full release or unbridled when low on gauge, but this one does really annoy me too. But we also voiced that in our feedbacks, and hopefully the devs will or already have reacted to that. And watching through my own footage, I got used to that one quickly as well. If you came from Sunbreak, I believe that gauge management can feel depressing in Wilds, but as someone who prefers Iceborne, it is manageable and I never really have to sit through the standing morph. Sword mode consumes too much switch gauge. I think they addressed it, but once again I personally felt like it wasn't that bad when you aren't focusing on full release slash, but yes, we could use more switch gauge or just less consumption, but maybe some skills will help with that in the full game, like focus or something like this. I understand when people now say, well, all these little things add up and become annoying and I can't enjoy the weapon anymore. I can still enjoy the weapon, even in its awful beta state, but that is my personal opinion that matters exactly as much as anybody else's, and we can all just give our feedback. But I just want people to see beyond the low damage of the beta test. We can't just jump back in since the beta is over, so in the worst case scenario we have to wait for the end of February. This video was basically made because I'm just so surprised by how negative the feedback on Wild Switch X is, and I think about it night and day, and I also watched a lot of videos from fellow creators, and the video from Monster Hunter specifically made me voice my own opinion, even if a lot of people may not agree with it. Because Monster Hunter said he struggled with his video and scrapped it multiple times due to being afraid to voice his own opinion. There's no way to make everybody happy, and as somebody who enjoys Iceborne Switch X more than Sunbreak's version, this is my opinion. Thank you so much for watching if you made it this far. We all want Switch X to be the best it can, so we all can have fun with a weapon, from newbie hitting their first offsets to speedrunners setting new records in animal cruelty. Happy hunting, guys.